Hello and welcome to Talking Shit About, a podcast where I, Elizabeth Whipperman, interview somebody about something they love, something they hate, something they've been through, or something they just know a lot about, and hopefully by the end we've all learned something. I am super cool, so I decided to re-release the Ruby Ridge episodes in one condensed episode, and it is a bonus, so your interviews and microsodes will still come out as regularly scheduled. This is a conversation I had with my husband, then fiance, about Ruby Ridge, content warning for death, animal death, child death, racism, anti-Semitism. It's a gnarly story. So there's a lot of content about it out there, but I found little bits and pieces from different sources that I really wanted to condense into one subject. There was also like a lot of podcast episodes that were only 30 minutes about the whole thing, and I'm like, you can't fucking talk about all of that shit in 30 minutes. So I wanted to create my own special little episode about it. I don't normally do report styles. It's not really my thing. I get really nervous reading out loud, as you'll be able to tell. And there's already just so many podcasts that are report style saturated out there. Shout out to Last Podcast on the Left, Behind the Bastards, Someplace Underneath, and Morbid. Those are my favorites. I do not compare myself to those podcasts when it comes to report style, but they are for sure an inspiration to me. Also, a couple notes before getting into the episode. My dogs are very annoying in this episode, and I'm so sorry. If you want to avoid hearing my dogs being super annoying in the future, you can support me by buying items off of my Amazon wish list. The link to that is in the show notes. That's going to help me set up my studio and my house. You can also join my Patreon for $5 a month, where you get weekly bonus, exclusive content, and then, oh shit, what was the other thing I was going to say about this episode? Right. So normally, with a report style episode, I would want to do all of my research and then record it, preferably in one sitting. With this Ruby Ridge series, I accidentally deleted all of my research, had to start over again, but I was already determined to air the episode, so it was a little rough, but I'm practicing reading out loud. I'm practicing doing this, so if I end up doing another research episode or series, hopefully it'll be a little bit smoother. But without any further ado, let's talk some shit.
I was like, what the fuck does that mean? I have friends that are firefighters, and I know that they use soap.
And she was screaming at me over soup.
Fuck this, I am not ever talking to a Scientologist again. These people are all insane.
I'm putting my bricks in the dumpsters, motherfuckers. Do you see me, bitches? I'm throwing my bricks. And he's just like chucking bricks.
Hello and welcome to episode 18 of Talking Shit About with me, Elizabeth, the dogs Link and Martok in the background, and my fiancé, Gil. Hi, boo.
Hi.
So Gil is here because he's a history buff, and you're laughing.
Yeah. History buff is sort of an exaggeration, but you know,
I don't know.
I studied history in college.
And you're the one who told me this story, and it was captivating. And ever since I started the podcast, I wanted to do this. So I'm really glad you were down to do this with me, so it wasn't just me talking for however many hours this is going to take.
No problem.
So today, real quick, Gil, can you tell us what we're talking? I'm going to put you on the spot. What are we talking about? What is this event that's about to happen?
So broadly what we're talking about is the siege at Ruby Ridge in Idaho in, I believe, 1992?
I think so.
92 or 93. This is the history buff getting called out on dates. So Ruby Ridge is a complicated topic because broadly it's the people who focus on it are American right-wing extremists, or at least people who have a leaning that way. And it's because most of the topics involved in, federal government overreach, federal siege on just an individual man seeking his freedom, they're the exact buzzwords that get that particular subset of the U.S. culture riled up and excited, because it feels to them it legitimizes their ideology and their belief structures about what's wrong with the U.S. government today.
Yeah, and it's especially scary. I mean, putting aside all of the Aryan Nation Association and everything and all of that happening, it's really scary because, like, living in a remote kind of rural area and, like, living sustainably and just, like, living your best life away from, like, the government is, like, also a pretty leftist dream as well, right?
Absolutely,
like,
absolutely.
That sounds like a wonderful life. And so it's
Yeah.
scary to think that you can be put in a situation where your whole family is slaughtered because of XYZ, which we'll get into.
Yeah. Yeah. And the XYZ is important, and it's not good stuff.
Yeah, if you're looking for a happy story, this is not it.
Yeah, it's not a happy story, and it's not about good people.
Yeah.
That's important to recognize throughout all of this.
Yeah, and on that note, yeah, so we're going to be talking about violence, death, racism, anti-Semitism. Any other isms or anything? Probably.
Yeah, they'll come up. Just expect a lot of isms.
Yeah. Real quick, we want to have a little disclaimer. A, we are not promoting or supporting any of these beliefs. Like,
Yeah, all these beliefs are in direct contradiction to my personal beliefs and Elizabeth's as well.
yes.
This is an interesting historical event, or part of U.S. history that has a troubling following, but the event itself deserves more attention from a broader audience. Not for the reasons that, like, far-right extremists want to promote it for, but because there were a lot of mistakes made that led to a disaster. Whether, like, the beliefs of the people involved aside, a lot of this is still quite atrocious.
Yeah, because there would be a narrative later on that Vicky was, like, gonna sacrifice the children and shit like this, and it's like, you gotta, like, look at the facts, and it's like, I'm not, in a sense, they're victims in this story, but you also can't ignore everything else. So that's what makes it so complicated. But I just wanted to let you guys know that A, we don't support any of these things. B, I try to do my best to distinguish when I'm quoting something from Randy, so that way, or even other sources, so that way you're not taking it necessarily as fact, but that way you can take it with a grain of salt, believe it if you want, that's up to you. And before we get into it, our three main sources, I'll have links to everything in the show notes. They are Ruby Ridge by Jess Walter, which used to be Every Knee Shall Bow, but they changed it. I'm not sure why. I tried looking into it. And then the book by Randy and Sara Weaver, The Federal Siege at Ruby Ridge, as well as the PBS documentary. What is that one called?
I think it's just called Ruby Ridge.
There's so many, and they all have, like, basically the same name.
Yeah.
Generation Y also does a really good episode about Ruby Ridge. It's the only one I've liked, that all of them that I've listened to. So shout out to them for doing a really good job, but I wanted more context, so we're getting it. Here we go. Randall Claude Weaver, also known as Pete, as he hated the name Randall, was born January 3rd, 1948, to Clarence and Wilma Weaver. Randy and his three older sisters grew up in Villisca, a conservative farming community in southern rural Iowa. In addition to working on the family farm, young Randy, because that's what most everybody calls him, like, I only see him referenced as Pete in Jess Walter's book. I don't know why. In addition to working on the family farm, young Randy enjoyed shooting and hunting with his dad, who always stressed gun safety. Randy also noted in his book that he never saw his father kill anything. The family was religious, bouncing from denomination to denomination, including evangelical, Baptist, and Presbyterian churches. In August of 1959, the family moved to Jefferson, Iowa, where between 6th grade and graduation, Randy worked over 6 different gigs, including baling hay and working as a paper carrier for the Des Moines Register. There, he settled into a Presbyterian church. From how he told it in his bio, it seems like he had a fairly happy childhood. After graduating in 1966, Randy attended Iowa Central Community College in Fort Dodge for 2 years, driving 50 miles to class each day. Fort Dodge was more racially diverse than Jefferson, and Randy seemed to get along well with everyone. It was during his second year that he met his future wife, Vicki Jordanson, although at the time they only dated casually. In October of 1968, Randy enlisted in the Army. During his 3 years of service, he completed Special Forces training and became a Green Beret, although he would only serve stateside. He achieved the rank of sergeant with a spotless record and the National Defense Service Medal and parachute badge. Despite not seeing combat, his Green Beret training would later come back to haunt him. Eventually, he was stationed at Fort Bragg. Randy grew disillusioned with the military after seeing its corruption.
It's funny, that's actually an interesting parallel with Timothy McVeigh as well, which this story has tons of parallels and is definitely one of the inspirations of the Oklahoma City bombing. So, just a little aside there.
Oh yeah, that name comes up. During his final year in the service, he rekindled his romance with Vicki Jordanson, spending most of his leave time visiting her in Fort Dodge. They married shortly after his honorable discharge in October of 1971. Now, Vicki. Vicki Jean Jordanson was born June 20th, 1949, to a religious family on a farm in Colville, Iowa. Her parents were Dave and I don't know if this is Jean or Jeanne Jordanson. I'm going to say Jean. And she had two siblings, brother Lanny and sister Julie. Randy described Vicki in his bio as a small, beautiful woman of Scottish and English descent with dark brown eyes and reddish-brown hair, although, honestly, it looks more black, and everyone else describes it as black. Doesn't matter. In his book, Jess Walter describes Vicki as a jack of all trades and incredibly smart. In school, she got A's, was vice president of the Future Business Leaders of America, and a star of the Pleasant Valley Pixies 4-H. Jean was a Congregationalist, while David practiced a branch of Mormonism, taking the children to the services every week. Here's what Britannica has to say about the Community of Christ, formerly known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Community of Christ claims to be the legal continuation of the church founded by Joseph Smith at Fayette in Seneca County, New York in 1830. The Community of Christ does not accept the
Appalachian, but not Appalachian like the mountains.
Yeah, that one. Mormon, because of the association with polygamy. Its belief system was based on the teachings of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, and the Doctrine of Covenants, a book of revelations received by the prophets of the Community of Christ and accepted by the vote of the General Conference. The Community of Christ believes in the Trinity, the doctrines of faith in God, repentance of sin, baptism by immersion, laying on of hands, and the resurrection of the dead, graded reward or punishment after death according to the conduct in this life, the continuity of divine revelation and the open canon of Scripture, the restoration of Christ's church in the New Testament pattern, and the doctrine of stewardship in personal and economic life. It anticipates the return of Christ and a millennial reign. Do you have any thoughts on that before we continue? Nope.
No,
Yeah,
getting into the weeds with Mormonism it's in the weeds.
Yeah, we get in the weeds here. I don't know how to do a segue with this, but I wanted to include this just because we're trying to get as much I'm trying to get as much information about everyone, and so you can have all of the context and make your own assumptions. But this one kind of speaks for itself. In a later letter to her cousin, Vicki once wrote, "You can't tell me that Joseph Smith advocated race mixing. There was no black RLDS elders until our generation." So,
and yeah, that's a very important historical note on Mormonism. Is it wasn't until I believe the late 60s or early 70s that people of color were allowed into the upper echelons of the Mormon Church. You could go to Africa and proselytize, but they wouldn't let them give them any status in the church.
Yeah. Thank you. Throughout her early life, Vicki's family butted heads with the government as the area became more developed. At one point, Vicki's family was under threat of being displaced from their home due to the proposed highway construction, but thankfully a neighbor of theirs was able to influence the project and the family was able to stay in their home. After graduating from Fort Dodge High School in 1967, Vicki enrolled at the Iowa Central Community College and graduated with a 2-year degree in business and took a job as a secretary at Sears. At the age of 21, she met Pete, aka Randy Weaver. At some point, she gets a degree in education. I didn't find where, but it comes up later in the story. Just not sure when it happened, or if that was related to her business degree somehow. Anyways, as mentioned earlier, Vicki and Randy Weaver married in November of 1971, a month after Randy's discharge from the Army. After the wedding, they moved to Cedar Falls, Iowa, where Randy attempted to pursue a career in federal law enforcement through the University of Northern Iowa, but dropped out after finding work at a John Deere factory. They became more and more invested in their religion, visiting the Cedarloo Baptist Church in Waterloo every Sunday, and eventually began holding Bible studies for their friends in their home. The couple tried for 4 years to have a child, but it got to the point where Vicky suggested they adopt, but Randy convinced her instead that they should buy a Corvette. 6 weeks after they bought the new car, Vicky discovered she was pregnant. After their first child, Sara, was born in March of 1976, they exchanged the Corvette for a family car. The Weavers would go on to have 3 additional children. Samuel Hansen, born 2 years after Sara in April of 1978, who formed a really strong bond with his older sister. After Sam was born, Vicky would have a miscarriage before the birth of her second daughter. Rachel, who was born in fall of 1981, was described by Randy as a quiet, happy little baby, but same thing. And finally, Elishaba, who would later be born on their property in Idaho. There were a couple factors that influenced the Weavers' decision to move to Idaho in the summer of 1983. The first was that their reputation was tarnished when a former friend of Randy's, known only as Woody, tried to turn the Weavers into the IRS, claiming the family was soliciting others to form a tax protest movement. Randy disputed this, saying in his bio that he had always paid his taxes, and that fact was confirmed by an IRS audit in 1985. The second factor in their decision was to move was that Vicky and Randy were becoming more extreme in their political and religious views and began to feel alienated within their community. Vicky wanted to homeschool her children due to the paganistic nature of public school, and at the time, homeschooling was illegal in Iowa, which is bizarre. Vicky would eventually begin to receive messages directly from God. Randy didn't go into specifics of his and Vicky's belief systems in his book, probably because he knew they weren't quote-unquote politically correct and that the details may alienate a sizable chunk of his potential audience. But here are a couple quotes to kind of give you an idea. On government, quote, "We are not anti-government, we are anti-bad government. At any given time, there are portions of our government that are not acting according to the people's wishes. Sometimes they are even acting unlawfully. We want to trust the government, but we have learned that it is not always a good idea." And on white supremacy. "To set the record straight, we are not and never have been supremacists. We can't help the fact that we were born white. A supremacist is a person who believes he or she is superior over another because of their race, religion, or even social status. You can consider us separatists both religiously and politically speaking. A religious separatist believes in freedom of religion and believes that he has the right to worship in his own way. Also, part of that religious separatist belief is that the different races should not intermarry. As far as that belief is concerned, you could be black, white, red, or yellow." So not great.
Yeesh.
Yeah, it's a little something. Racist, the word. Per his bio, this is his recommended reading list to kind of give you an idea. Feel free to comment on any of these, boo. 1984 by George Orwell. None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen. The Final Reformation by C.J. Coster. Babylon Mystery Religion by Ralph Woodrow. Unintended Consequences by John Ross. Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand.
Lol.
101 Things to Do Till the Revolution by Claire Wolfe. And Call to Serve by Bo Greitz.
Oh, Jesus. Bo Greitz comes up in this story later, too.
Oh, yeah, it does.
And I always laugh when I see 1984 mentioned by broadly right-wing, or especially right-wing extremist people. There's some quote that's like, 1984 and the Bible are the two books most quoted by people who either didn't read it or at least didn't understand it. George Orwell being a well-recorded anarchist. And by anarchist, I mean leftist anarchist. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. It's just amusing.
Yes. In addition to the King James Bible, another influential book in Vicky's life was Hal Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth. Here's a blurb from Wikipedia about the book. Oh, that's a really long blurb.
The Late Great Planet Earth is a treatment of literalist, premillennial, dispensational eschatology. That is, part of theology concerned with death, judgment, and the final destiny of the soul and humankind. As such, it compared end-time prophecies in the Bible with then-current events in an attempt to predict future scenarios, resulting in the rapture of believers before the tribulation and second coming of Christ to establish his 1,000-year, i.e. millennial, kingdom on earth. That is a very long sentence. Mm-hmm. Emphasizing various passages in the book of Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation, Lindsey originally suggested the possibility that these climactic events might occur during the 1980s, which he interpreted as one generation from the foundation of modern Israel during 1948. a major event according to some conservative evangelical schools of eschatological thought. There's a whole lot behind that, and it's the same reason that a lot of evangelical Christians are very, very supportive of Israel, despite Israel being a Jewish state. And we don't have time to get into Israel and Palestine and all of that either. So that'd be its own 7-episode series. All right. Descriptions of alleged fulfilled prophecy were offered as proof of the infallibility of God's word and evidence that unfulfilled prophecies would soon find their denouement in God's plan for the planet. He cited an increase in the frequency of famines, wars, and earthquakes as major events just prior to the end of the world. He also foretold a Soviet invasion of Israel, War of Gog and Magog. Lindsay also predicted that European Economic Community, which preceded the European Union, was destined, according to biblical prophecy, to become a United States of Europe. That's sort of funny. Which in turn he says is destined to become a revived Roman Empire ruled by the Antichrist. Lindsay wrote that he had concluded, since there was no apparent mention of America in the books of Daniel or Revelation, that America would not be a major geopolitical power by the time the tribulations of the end times arrived.
Thank you for reading that.
No problem.
Clearly I'm having a hard time reading. I'm like, I really need to get my glasses. Another more foreboding text of Vicky's choice was H.G. Wells' A Dream of Armageddon, from Jess Walters' book. You want me to take this one, or you got it?
I can do it.
Okay.
Quote, in Wells's story, the man dreams he is a great leader living with a woman in the future on a 1,000-foot cliff with a view in several directions. On his cliff, men come to him and tell him they are at war with him. Why cannot you leave me alone, the dreamer asks. I have done with these things. I have ceased to be anything but a private man. Yes, the other man answers, but what have you thought? This talk of war, these reckless challenges, these wild aggressions. Later in the story, the man and woman flee, but they are not followed. There is no refuge for us, he says in his dream. They escape down their hill into Naples, Italy, and are followed by airplanes. In the end, the couple stays together in the face of horrible danger. Even now, I do not repent. I will not repent. I made my choice, and I will hold on to the end. Finally, the man and woman are killed, and the dream, like the short story, ends.
Life imitates art.
Yeah, it's oddly poignant.
Yes, I really wanted to include that. And if you aren't familiar with the story, you'll find out why. Randy and Vicky believed things like world events were proving the prophecies of the end times were happening, that computers were quote-unquote the beast of revelations, and the Holocaust never happened. It did, by the way.
Yes.
Julie believed that Randy was being radicalized by her sister's beliefs. In fact, the Cedar Falls Police Department was secretly looking into the Weavers' Bible group, known as The Group, to determine if it was a cult.
The group.
The group. It's very clever. I guess that's what other people were calling them. They were just like referring to them as the group,
okay.
and then it just became a thing. It wasn't like they named themselves. It was also during this tumultuous time for the Weavers that their quote-unquote friend Shannon connected the Weavers with a reporter from the Waterloo Courier named Dan Dundon, although in his book Randy gets his name wrong and it's D-U-N-D-E-N. So it's just really fun to kind of like just keep fact-checking everything, because Randy was a lot of things. Unfortunately, a writer is not one. But, you know, he did his best. Dundon had heard of the group and wanted to probe Randy further on his beliefs. Here's what Randy said about the interview.
We kept trying to explain our views and philosophies. Dundon indicated to us that he wasn't interested in what we thought. He wanted to see our food supplies, and especially our guns and ammunition. Shannon had evidently told him that survivalists often build fortified compounds with a 300-yard kill zone around them. Dundon asked if we were going to do that. We told him no, we didn't think that sort of thing was necessary. When the article came out in the paper, Dundon had lied and said we were going to build a fortified compound with a 300-yard kill zone. Later, Dundon would repeat this lie in court under oath. Although he tape-recorded the interview, Dundon now claims he lost the tape.
Yeah. Again, that'll come back later. Between the botched interview, tension between their family and friends, and the IRS drama, the Weavers were done with their life in Iowa. In the summer of 1983, the family picked up and drove to Idaho, stopping by Reptile Gardens in Black Hills, South Dakota on their way. Shout out to Reptile Gardens. I haven't been as an adult, but as a kid, it was like one of my favorite places on earth. I'm going to put a picture on my Instagram of me at Reptile Gardens because it's super relevant. I don't know how else to promote this. They were trying to find their new home before September 7th, as God told them they would. After 3 to 4 weeks of searching northern Idaho, on September 6th, the Weavers found their property about 8 miles south of Bonner's Ferry, a property now known as Ruby Ridge. Randy had this to say about the move to the mountains.
Quote, "Our goal and our dream as we left was to move into the mountains to be free. Free to worship the Creator in our own way, to build a home and live as self-sufficient as possible. We were not looking to do battle with anyone. We did not hate anyone. We wanted to be left alone."
And to quote the Bible,
"Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains."
Matthew 24. The term Ruby Ridge was coined by the media. According to the Weavers and Jess Walter, the real name of the area is actually Caribou Ridge and Ruby Creek drainage, and was originally inhabited by Kootenai Indians. Their property spanned 20 acres of the craggy, forested mountainside. They built their new home by hand upon a knoll overlooking a birch grove and an outcropping of rocks, from which the family could see anyone coming down their driveway. The modest 2-story cabin consisted of 3 bedrooms upstairs, and on the ground floor, a living room, bathroom, kitchen, and pantry. Because the terrain was so uneven, the cabin, made of plywood, sawmill waste, and 2x4s, was built upon stilts. The cabin was built to last 3 years, just long enough for Armageddon. Cool. There existed on the property a root cellar, pump house, chicken house, outhouse, and woodshed. It was Vicky's father, Dave, who helped set up the gravity-fed water system for use in the summer months, as the lines would freeze in the winter. And so Sam trained his yellow lab Striker as a sled dog to pull containers of water using a harness that he and Sara made. Oh, I forgot a content warning, but you know it's a sad story if there's a dog involved. I'm just going to say that. As for critters, they also had 2 horses, Amigo and Lightning, and Sara was definitely a horse girl, while Rachel, on the other hand, tended to the chickens. They also had 2 other dogs, both collie mutts. The Weaver children were homeschooled by their mother, who had earned an associate's in education. Again, not sure when. The children studied 4 hours per day, 4 days per week. In addition to their schooling, Randy said they worked hard at teaching their children values such as respect and appreciation for one another, and especially honesty. He wrote that his children were his pride and joy. Aside from teaching the children, Vicky spent her time making clothes for her family, refinishing old furniture, varnishing cabinets and floors, sewing curtains and cushions, teaching Sara to make rugs, and all the while keeping up on the house and garden. According to Randy, blue was Vicky's favorite color, and that was reflected in her work, as you'll see on the curtains of the infamous cabin door. Another conflicting fact that's really not that relevant, but I wanted to throw it in anyways. Jess Walter's book says that Vicky's favorite color was purple, which was her bridesmaid's dress's color, but I'm gonna believe Randy on this one. Or maybe it changed. That's what you said. Again, it's little details. We're getting in the weeds. The kids also stayed busy by tending to the animals, fishing, exploring, reading. Sam especially loved to read, most notably history books, and helping their mother with household chores. Randy noted that Vicky was particularly patient with young Rachel, who typically made the chores take longer than they should.
How dare these child laborers take too long?
After moving into their new homestead, they met Kevin Harris, who at the time was 16 and barely scraping by, doing labor for his mother's ex-boyfriend. Kevin was born sometime around 1967 and had a 9th grade level education. His father passed away when he was just 2 years old, and he says he was raised by a series of stepfathers. Kevin spent his time with the Weavers to help build their cabin, joining Sara and Sam as they fished, and enjoying Vicky's home-cooked meals. Kevin would end up living with the Weavers on their property on and off for the next 9 years. Here's what Kevin later had to say about the Weavers.
"I was never at Ruby Ridge because of religion or politics. I know that a lot of people there were offended by Randy's and Vicky's beliefs, but I visited the Weavers simply because they were like family to me. They loved me and I loved them. They always welcomed me, accepted me, and made me feel that I belonged. They were warm and hospitable. There was always a place to sleep and food on the table, even when they didn't have much for themselves."
And Sara and Kevin were especially close, too. And by all accounts, the Weavers had a happy, loving household, but mostly on the inside. A man named Terry Kinnison had to put $3,000 to have a trailer and barn put on the Weavers' property, but something went wrong and Kinnison bounced. He said he was kicked off. Randy says otherwise. He told the local sheriff, the FBI, and Secret Service that Randy was planning on killing President Reagan, which I wish he had, the Idaho Governor John Evans, telling him that Randy was stockpiling weapons and ammunition, and he had rigged the property with explosives. Sam O'Halley, who was half Kootenai and half German Jewish, lived next to the Weavers for a time and corroborated Kinnison's tale, adding that anyone who went on the property would have to face 3 armed people, Randy, Vicky, and Sammy, who was 6 years old at that time. The Weavers wrote letters in response, trying to clear their name, even writing to Reagan himself. He never responded.
What a dick.
I know. That's the worst thing Reagan ever did. We should do an episode on... We should do one. I'm sure Behind the Bastards already has one.
Yeah.
And, yeah. Anyways, after this, the FBI agent named Kenneth Weiss, who had only been in the FBI for 3 years, was sent to Idaho to investigate the order. Randy Weaver's name came across his desk, but he ultimately dismissed Randy as involved or having any relationship with the order. In 1984, the Weavers' life on the mountain would all come crumbling down after Randy met a man named Frank Cumnick. All right, let's talk about the Aryan Nations.
Sick.
Woo! All right. Located in the beautiful area surrounding Hayden Lake, Idaho, rested the world headquarters of the Aryan Nations. Boo, what's our policy when we're driving through Idaho?
The Idaho Stop Law, which is you don't stop in Idaho.
Yep. The Hay Group held an annual Aryan Nation World Congress, an event that drew in all kinds of anti-Semitic, racist, and xenophobic characters to hang out, eat some food, mingle, burn crosses, salute Hitler, etc. There's a former University of Montana professor that would take students to the World Congress, and I wish I could remember his name.
Yeah, he's from the African American Studies department too.
Yeah, like Tobin talked
knew
about him.
yeah.
We had him in for a class.
We went to University of Montana, so this is pretty, like, there's some proximity there.
Yeah. The Aryan Nations was founded by a man named Richard Butler from the Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, website.
Butler, born 1918, is a World War II veteran who later worked as an engineer for Lockheed in Southern California, where he was introduced to identity teachings by William Potter Gale, a retired colonel and aide to General Douglas MacArthur in the Southern Pacific. So, all sorts of good stuff involved. He's leader of the paramilitary California Rangers and a founder of the Posse Comitatus. By the mid-1960s, Butler had fully embraced identity...
Capitalized.
Capitalized identity.
Christian identity.
The Christian identity movement, which this actually doesn't do a good job of clarifying. But anyways, Butler had fully embraced identity and served as national director of the Christian Defense League, an organization founded by the most prominent popularizer of identity, Wesley Swift. Butler worked under Swift for 10 years until Swift's death in 1971, at which time Butler proclaimed his Church of Jesus Christ Christian to be the direct successor to Swift's ministry. Butler moved the congregation to northern Idaho, where it became, in his words, a call to the nations, or Aryan Nations. Its goal, as a subsequent newsletter stated, was to form a national racial state. We shall have it at whatever price is necessary. Just as our forefathers purchased their freedom in blood, so must we. We will have to kill the bastards. During the early 1980s, Butler followers joined the members of the Neo-Nazi National Alliance and Ku Klux Klan splinter groups to form the Silent Brotherhood, known more widely as the Order, which planned to overthrow the United States government in hopes of establishing an Aryan homeland in the Pacific Northwest. In order to raise funds for this revolution, members of the group went on a crime spree in 1983 and 1984 that included bank robberies, counterfeitings, bombings, armored car holdups, and murder. The counterfeiting operation was based at the Aryan Nations compound. The Order's activities came to an end in December 1984 when its founder and leader, Robert Matthews, died in a fire during a shootout with federal agents on Whidbey Island, Washington, and many of its members were caught and incarcerated. Yet, the Order, and to a lesser degree, Aryan Nations, has retained a mythic status in the far-right underground. Yep.
The Order's anti-Semitic and anti-government sentiments were spread amongst those who found themselves at Hayden Lake. According to Jess Walter, the FBI, ATF, which is the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms...
Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
Right. It should be BAFF.
Yeah.
And various sheriff's departments had informants in the Aryan Nations stating, quote, at some meetings, half the participants were reporting to some agency or another, with some spies reporting on other spies without even knowing. Classic. In the fall of 1986, 5 bombs went off in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, set off by a group calling themselves the Order 2. The bombs damaged the federal courthouse, 3 businesses, and the home of Reverend Bill Wasmuth, a leader of the Kootenai County Human Rights Task Force. Randy Weaver attended his first Congress in that same summer of 1986 with a man he had met 2 years prior named Frank Cumnick. To get a feel for the event, here's some snippets of a New York Times article on that year's Congress.
Quote, a gathering of Nazi sympathizers, white separatists, anti-Semites, and Ku Klux Klan members convened at the Aryan Nations World Congress here this weekend. They called for a white, male-dominated homeland in the Northwest. The meeting involved 2 days of speeches, Nazi-style salutes, and a cross burning, for which the Hayden Lake Fire Department issued a bonfire permit, according to Captain Gordon Orisher, because there isn't any regulation for burning a cross. Young men in camouflage uniforms, wearing mesh masks, walked around the perimeter of the 20-acre property of the Reverend Richard Butler, one of the leaders of the Aryan Nations movement. They were armed with AR-15 automatic rifles. That's questionable, but never mind. Several wore swastika armbands. The grim young men contrasted oddly with Sunday outing quality of the gathering. Apart from an occasional racist t-shirt message and Wehrmacht flags, that's the SS skull. Actually, don't quote me on that. That might just be the swastika
Hold on, fact
flag.
check. So, just so everybody knows, I started all of this research. How many pages of research do I have? Like 27? And I had started it and got pretty far, and then I fucking accidentally deleted it.
There it is. It's the Iron Cross swastika flag.
Cool.
Okay.
Now we know.
I didn't study World War II any more than I had to in my history degree.
I studied, with Tobin, dismantling white supremacy, but, there's so many flags. They all just kind of start to run together, and they all look the same, and they're all stupid.
Restart that last bit?
Oh, no, you can keep going.
Apart from an occasional racist t-shirt message and Wehrmacht flags, the meeting could have been any summer gathering of working-class men, women, and children.
Also in attendance was Daniel Johnson of Los Angeles, a representative from the League of Pace Amendment Advocates, which is named for James O. Pace, the author of the idea. Continuing from the same New York Times, the article.
It opposes the 14th Amendment because it extends the Bill of Rights to the states and assures citizenship to all. That done, the group would repatriate all non-whites after paying compensation for taking their property. Mr. Johnson seemed to be alone among the delegates in considering Jews white and therefore eligible to remain if they were not more than 1/8 Middle Eastern. But Mr. Butler, along with most of the other participants, said he no longer believed it would be possible to expel non-whites and said he preferred splitting the country up, with whites in the Northwest and the rest allotted to Zog, meaning Zionist Occupation Government, which is what the racists call the federal government. Mr. Butler said the separations of the Northwest from the rest of the country was already underway in the movement of white families to the region. That term Zog is going to come up in other things and also brings up sort of a weird contradiction in beliefs about like supporting Israel, which is an inherently Zionist government, but then being opposed to Zionist occupation governments. It's full of contradictions because it's a stupid contradictory belief set.
See, this is why I wanted you here.
Yeah. So what is Zog from the ADL website? The history of the present Zionist occupied government of the United States of America is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having a direct object, the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states, moreover throughout the entire world. We, therefore, the representatives of the Aryan people in council, appealing to the supreme God of our folks for the rectitude of intentions, solemnly publish and declare that the Aryan people in America are, and of rights ought to be, a free and independent nation. That they are absolved from all allegiance to the United States of America, and that all political connections between them and the federal government thereof is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. And that as a free and independent nation, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to perform all other acts which independent nations may of right do.
And the way I worded that, it makes it sound like the ADL is promoting this. They're quoting somebody else.
Probably the Aryan nations.
Yeah. Sorry. Don't
And
worry.
here's a cute little picture of Randy wearing his Say No to Zog shirt.
Yeah, if you look up pictures of Randy or watch the PBS documentary, you'll see that photo. So clearly, he identified a lot with the other Congress attendees. That being said, after the events of Ruby Ridge, he would speak publicly about his beliefs, stating multiple times he was not a racist. This is what he had to say about the other attendees at the Congress.
There was quite an assortment of people there from all over the U.S., a few from Europe and some from Canada. I talked to a number of people there who also did not agree with the Aryan Nation racial views. They, like me, enjoyed sharing common beliefs and learning about different viewpoints. I question what the common beliefs are, if not that, but anyways. I only listened to a couple of the scheduled speakers in their church before I realized I didn't want to hear any more tirades against non-whites. I was much more comfortable outside on the picnic tables mingling with the crowd. I can understand hating someone because they hurt you or your family, but to hate someone just because they're of another race is sheer ignorance.
Unless they're Jewish.
Yeah, he doesn't like Jewish people. The question, it's like, there's always the question is like, was Randy a white supremacist? He claims he's not. He probably was. Was he actively organizing in a white supremacist fashion? Probably not. Was he anti-Semitic? Definitely. No question. Anyways.
Yeah, in Jess Walter's book, I like all the information in the book, but he doesn't make clear, like, it reads like a novel, and I kind of hate that. Like, I like this person said this, and I got that from an audio recording. I got that from court documents, and it doesn't do that. And so he tells this story about, and we'll get into this, about a conversation between Randy and some undercover agents. And again, I'm not trying to like defend Randy here. And they're talking about Martin Luther King Jr. and Randy calls him like the N-word. And I'm like, I don't disbelieve it, but it's like, is this a recorded conversation that you got this from? Or is this the FBI agents saying that? Because like, I don't trust a goddamn thing coming out of their fucking mouths. So like
they fucked up badly. They're trying to cover their asses and make the Weavers look as bad as possible. And again, the Weavers were bad people. Not the kids. Kids are generally innocent, especially when they're 8.
People are complicated.
Some
people more so.
Yeah. Personally, if there was an Aryan Nations compound, even if I was trying to get to know my neighbors, I wouldn't go there.
No, but, I would move.
But yeah. Anyways.
Anyways. I'm not here to defend Randy Weaver or to claim to know his true beliefs. My goal here is to provide as much information and context as objectively as I can. But anyway. So, if Randy Weaver claims he isn't racist, just a separatist, why are we bringing all of this up? While the Aryan Nations is a designated hate group, what drew the Fed's attention isn't the racism or necessarily the anti-Semitism, but rather the anti-government sentiments and actions. The existence and prevalence of modern groups like the Proud Boys show us that the government doesn't really care until it becomes a problem for them. Like, they can have their peaceful protests, they can march in the streets, but as soon as it's like, oh, we're gonna storm the Capitol, it's like, oh shit, now it's our problem. It's like that Robot Chicken sketch of fucking, like, Kid Hitler. And,
don't know
oh, god damn it. Someone out there listening is like, oh, I know that sketch. It's hilarious. We'll watch it later.
Now, class. My teacher, I will need the Czechoslovakian boys' desk as well. What's going on here? It's not my problem. Now, it's my problem.
And you mentioned Timothy McVeigh earlier. There are so many repercussions and echoes from this event.
Yeah, this massive fuck-up inspired a lot of other fuck-ups.
Yeah. All this information, all this context is so that you know what's behind the entire shitstorm that's about to go down. As mentioned in the previous episode, Randy attended the 1986 Aryan World Congress with Frank Cumnick, and there Frank Cumnick introduced him to Gustav Antony Magisano. Gus was a biker gang member interested in dealing weapons and working for the Order and the Order 2. The very cool names that we talked about. On January 20th, 1987, the three met at a park in Sandpoint and talked inside Randy's Jeep. Gus had been expecting to meet with Frank only about weapons, so he was surprised to see Randy there. As an icebreaker, the three made some racist comments about MLK and then got down to business. But before they began, Frank asked Gus if he would do an electric scan to identify any wires or weapons, and he said he would, so he consented. The three grabbed some lunch at Connie's Motor Inn. Gus took a potty break, they got coffee, and then they got back in the Jeep to drive to a secluded spot. There, Frank performed his scan on Gus with this little, like, doodad that he had. He was, like, bragging that he got it from, like, for $1 or something at a, pawn shop or something. And he passed the scan, but still, Frank pulled out a .22 Derringer pistol, cocked it, and pointed it at Gus's head. It stayed there for a few minutes while Frank and Randy intimidated him, but eventually the gun was put away, and they went back to their talk of revitalizing the Order and how you just can't trust anybody these days. Then the men went to, I think it's Papandrea's Pizza, where they met up with Vicky and Frank's wife, Mary Lou. More general racist and xenophobic discussion ensued. In his bio, Randy recalls how Frank and Gus would talk too openly, about robbing armories and stealing firearms. And, like, Frank's quoted in Jess's book as coming up with some, like, weird shit, like, involving, like, crazy glue and, like, all sorts of stuff. So, kind of interesting. But, anywho's, Gus was really interested in making plans for their hate group. Gus asked Frank to give him a list the next time they met of a group of things that they want to get done each month, like a little schedule of, like, activities that they want done each month. And it's just kind of like...
They put it in their planner.
Yeah, for your planner. And if that sounds weird, it's because it is weird, and that's because Gus wasn't Gus. Gus was actually Kenneth Fadley, a private investigator from Spokane. For the entire interaction, Fadley had been armed with a .22 pistol strapped to his ankle and a wire going up his left sleeve, which he had frantically adjusted when he was able to sneak off to the bathroom earlier. Frank only scanned his right arm, so not his left arm where the wire was. And before Frank could scan his leg, Gus had kind of like grabbed the scanner from him and was like, oh, what's this? Blah, blah, blah. And they kind of like bullshitted for a second, and then he put it away, so he never actually scanned where the gun was. So Fadley was buddied up with an ATF agent by the name of Herb Byerly, and he had been on the other end of the wire that Fadley had worn on January 20th. He was gathering intelligence on criminal and violent activities that the Aryan nations may be planning. Later in the Senate hearings about Ruby Ridge, the subcommittee on Ruby Ridge would note that Fadley had virtually no training before he was sent to infiltrate the Aryan nations. Sorry, I'm wrestling with a dog while I'm doing this because she's very needy right now. She's not used to me being at work. According to the Jordansons, the Weaver family seemed to be less paranoid and less extreme in their beliefs in the months prior to the beginning of the siege. It was during this time that Vicky's father helped construct a guest house, which many sources refer to as the menstruation shed, and say that the girls were forced out there when Aunt Flo came around. But actually, Vicky used it more as a retreat to have a quiet space of her own. That's according to her sister. It was more of like, kind of Vicky's like, I'm on my period, kind of just everybody piss off kind of shit. It wasn't like, oh, the girls are like, there's that narrative going around. It's like, that's not necessarily what it was. Like, that, like... People
sometimes need space.
Yeah.
In general.
I made a note that, like, honestly, a menstruation shed sounds dope as hell.
I don't have anywhere to build one. So.
Yeah, no. Tool shed first. During this time, Randy also ran for sheriff, handing out business cards that said, "Vote Weaver for sheriff," and they were handwritten on one side, and then on the other side it said, "Get out of jail free." He told one newspaper reporter, quote,
I question whether they should pass any laws to protect the individual from themselves. I believe in what I call scriptural socialism. Take care of your neighbor.
Yeah. He's all about not wearing seatbelts and helmets are stupid. He said helmets and seatbelts are stupid. Yeah, no, it's like one of those things where you're like you see a word and you're like some like keywords and you're like, oh, that okay, yeah, and then
scriptural socialism. You mean scripture? And then it's like, oh, okay, you just
at the time of the election,
an idiot.
Yeah. There were 7,000 registered voters in the county, and the turnout was 1,500. Randy lost the Republican primary. He got 102 votes versus his competitor Lonnie Elkstrom, who was the Boundary County's first bailiff, and he received 383 votes.
Huh.
He
did all right.
He definitely didn't win, but he had a following.
No, he had 10.5% of all voters, and that was a primary, so he's really only looking at maybe, I don't know, it's Idaho, so it's probably pretty Republican, but it's also the 80s, and that stuff was different. Huh. He did all right.
Yeah.
Better than I did when I ran for sheriff.
Man, to be married to the sheriff.
Yeah.
It's alright. I'll settle for you. Just kidding. Okay. Tensions were increasing between Frank Cumnick and Randy. Randy said that Frank was becoming too radical and told Fadley so one time when he came to visit the family. Frank was also there, but he left abruptly after he and Randy got into a heated argument. In fact, a month after Randy first met Fadley and Frank had gone for a hike and talked about kidnapping kids from the Rocky Mountain Academy, a high-end school that Frank worked at, and to hold the kids hostage to help fund a white uprising. Apparently, like, Clint Eastwood's kids went there. It was a bunch of, like, super yuppie-duppy kids, and then there's, like, they were gonna go after, like, Jewish kids, too, and, like...
Yeah, sounds about right.
That was the whole thing. Frank says it was Fadley's idea. Fadley says it was Frank's idea. Either way, Frank was fired from his job after his van was spotted at the Aryan Nation's compound. And so far, at this point, all the ATF had on Frank was a sawed-off rifle that Fadley claims Frank sold him. At that point in time, as well, the ATF was beginning to focus more on Montana and the more supremacist action that was happening over there. Militias were also beginning to pop up in the Big Sky State. The big one being the Militia of Montana, very cleverly named.
Yeah, it's still around.
And it inspired many copycats. So that's that. On October 11th of 1989, Fadley met with Randy to ask where he could find guns, specifically sawed-off shotguns. At the time, Randy and Vicky were renting a place down by the highway and couldn't afford their rent, and Randy told Fadley that they were on hard times. Fadley suggested they take a trip to Montana to sell some guns, but at the very last minute, as they were, like, ready to go, Randy's distrust got the better of him, and he didn't make the trip. But not before he agreed to saw off some Remington Model 870 shotguns. There is some debate, again, between Randy and Fadley. What's that?
Oh, it's a good shotgun.
I hear is it common for duck hunting?
Remington 870 is, like, probably one of the top 3 most produced and sold 12-gauge pump shotguns in the world.
Gotcha.
Especially in the 80s, they were very good. Or I guess in the early 90s. They didn't slump until the late 2000s in quality. But that is really unimportant.
They just don't make them like they used to.
They don't make them like they used to.
Yeehaw!
But anyway.
There's some debate, again, between Randy and Fadley about where Fadley said to cut it. And then they get into this whole situation about he said he was going to pay me this. He said I would pay him that. But Randy claimed Fadley offered him $700 for the 2 guns that he sawed off. One was a pump action and the other was a single shot, and both had been cut about 5.5 inches shorter than the legal allowance. In order for this to be legal, Randy would have had to apply to the government and cough up $200 for registration, which of course he did not do.
File as a short barrel rifle.
Yes. The two met again in Sandpoint on October 24th of that year, where Fadley handed Randy $300 rather than the $700 he was promised. They met again in November, where Fadley paid Randy another $100. During this meeting, Randy accused Fadley of being a snitch, which he of course denied. This is again a game of he said, but I gotta be honest, I don't know about Frank. He had some pretty bonkers ass ideas, but I don't doubt that Frank is the one. No, god damn it. All the names are getting so mixed up in my head because I was just like doing this all at once.
Gus.
Gus.
Gus is the narc name.
Yes. Gus asked Randy to saw off the shotguns. Like, that's my opinion, or at least put him in a situation where like he felt that was his only option.
Well, and that's really standard for like these kinds of cases too, where the ATF or FBI or any law enforcement agent broadly, they try that. It's also what gives credence to the idea that Gus was the one who was sort of like introducing the idea of the kidnap idea, or like reinvigorating the order. Is the idea is to, but through encouragement, you could call it entrapment, but encouragement, getting someone to commit a crime so that you can arrest them for this crime, and what they offer to the person who is arrested is a plea deal to cooperate with, basically become another undercover informant. I think it was Gus's idea to saw it off. I don't think it was Randy's. Randy obviously agreed to do it, which was stupid, especially with the guy you kind of thought was a narc.
Yeah, right. He's like, but I did it anyway.
Clearly, he didn't doubt him that much.
Yeah. Well, he was like real desperate for money, so I think that was like kind of.
Well, we can get into the law enforcement exploiting poor people to commit crimes and they can use them as confidential informants. But, that gets...
Gus's cover had been blown. He doesn't know if it was by Randy or somebody else, but he's out. And he wouldn't see Randy again until Randy's trial in 1993. Sweet pea, I don't know what to do for you. The feds finally had what they needed to blackmail Randy into becoming an informant, like you said. 6 months later, Byerly contacted Randy and said that he would be charged with multiple accounts of federal firearms violations if he didn't comply with their plan to use him as an informant. Randy told the man to go to hell. The Weaver family took a vote, and none of the kids wanted their father to turn himself in, so he didn't. Things were tough financially. Their only steady income was an occasional $80 check from their settlement with Terry Kinnison. They felt like the world was coming down around them. Another 6 months passed before Randy and Vicky were arrested at gunpoint on Ruby Creek Road as they attempted to help two people with their broken down car, who turned out to be agents, and then there were more agents hiding out in the woods. Vicky was released after about 20 minutes, but Randy was taken to Coeur d'Alene County Jail. The next day, Randy was released after signing his property over as a promissory bond for his scheduled court date, rather than to pay the $10,000 price tag. This meant that if Randy didn't show up, or if he lost his case, his family would lose their home, or so he thought. It turns out that the magistrate was incorrect when he told Randy he would lose his property. And Randy had a special guest there to speak to his character, and it was Wayne Jones, security chief for the Aryan Nations. On their ride home that day, Vicky was praying to Yahweh and received a message that the family should stay on the mountain.
Gotta trust those messages from Yahweh.
Yeah. Vicky wrote a letter to her sister in January of 1991, and to her sister it seemed to be a goodbye note. Days later, a letter would show up at the U.S. Attorney's Office addressed to the servant of the Queen of Babylon from Mrs. Vicky Weaver. It contained some Bible quotes, some stuff about Yahweh.
You send that to a P.O. box?
And a quote from Bob Matthews, the former leader of the order that we talked about in part 1. Will you read this quote from me, my love?
A long-forgotten wind is starting to blow. Do you hear the approaching thunder? It is that of the awakened Saxon. War is upon the land. The tyrant's blood will flow.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, they took this letter as a threat. I'm not sure what Vicky's intentions were when she sent the letter, but it did not help their case.
Was this sent... Wait, this was sent to the feds, or was this
This was sent to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Okay, yeah.
Who serves the Queen of Babylon. Who,
yes, I'd like to send this general delivery to the Queen of Babylon.
Oh, it was addressed to someone specific. I didn't write down his name. I was kind of like, all right, there's enough names. Clearly, I'm struggling with the names.
Yeah, it's not important.
I was like, we don't need another one. Randy received a notice stating that his court date was scheduled for March 20th, 1990, but the actual date of the trial was February 20th, 1990. On top of that, the original date was actually February 19th, but the judge had decided he didn't want anyone traveling on a holiday. So when Randy didn't show in February, he was a wanted man.
Wait, they gave him a bad court date schedule?
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah, super fucked up. Randy's failure to appear warrant went out. The chief deputy marshal in Boise, Ron Evans, sent a letter to D.C. stating that Randy Weaver could be, quote,
another Bob Matthews in his homestead. Another Whidbey Island standoff.
It would later be revealed in the Senate hearings that despite the Attorney General's office knowing about the date mix-up, they, quote,
nevertheless indicted Weaver on March 14th for his failure to appear 6 days before the date he officially had been given. At least equally disturbing is the fact that prosecutors failed to inform the grand jury of this exculpatory evidence when they argued for Weaver's indictment.
Mm-hmm. It's not totally clear to me when this following event occurred, but I believe it was in August of 1991. Kevin had his only interaction with law enforcement in regard to Randy Weaver.
A man who identified himself as a marshal called my foster mom in Spokane looking for me. I returned the call. The man told me, you're probably not going to be able to help me, but I want to ask you something. What kind of guns does Weaver have? And would he booby-trap his property? I said, you're right. I can't help you. He said, okay, and hung up. Which actually, that's a fucking awesome answer.
Okay, so that's a good pausing point. We should probably take the dogs for a W, like, real fast, because they're driving us nuts. And they're probably driving all of you nuts, so we're going to be right back. We're back. Everybody's pottied. Everybody's poopied. The dogs are wrestling over their wubba. They're gonna make noise no matter what we do. So, at least I know it sounds like they're fighting, but Link is just that's just how he sounds when he plays. He's a terror. He's part Chihuahua. Okay. So for the next 18 months, the Weavers stayed holed up in their cabin, even when Vicky gave birth to their last child, Elishaba Ann, on October 24th, 1991, at 11:15 a.m. Randy said that Vicky was in labor for 36 hours and said this of his wife. She was so tiny, yet so tough. According to Sara, her brother Sam was the first person to make the baby smile. In their 18-month stay on the property, Randy claimed to have tried negotiating with the U.S. Marshal Service, but got nowhere, nor did the local sheriff ever visit the Weavers. He just called them paranoid at some point. In one interaction with U.S. Marshal Dave Hunt, Randy claims that he told him he just wanted the truth, to which Hunt replied, "Truth is only philosophical." Randy claimed he then responded with one final message.
If I believed that truth is only philosophical, I'll come off the mountain and be the best damn snitch you ever had.
Hunt and Ron Evans debated what methods they should use on the Weavers. Evans wanted to use a direct tactical attack on the house, but Hunt was concerned, rightfully so, for the safety of both agents and the Weavers, and was very much interested in negotiating. Eventually, they agreed to have SOG, the Special Operations Group, not to be confused with ZOG, provide technical assistance and tactical support should it be needed. SOG then handed the Weavers' case file over to a psychologist who gave Vicky and Randy assessments. Never meeting them, which is always great.
Very sus.
They're always never accurate. I mean, maybe there are some out there, but just from what I can tell.
And like, if all you have to work with are like Vicky's like Babylon letters, like I could see reading between the lines some there, but like still.
Yeah. So what she wrote in Vicky's profile would totally skew how the world viewed her as a mother. The psychologist reported that Vicky loved her family so much that she would kill her own children if it meant staying together. Randy and Sara have said this is not who their mother was. Vicky's family and friends have said that's not who she was. In a letter to her mother, Vicky wrote, "We aren't stupid nor paranoid. Nobody has to worry about being shot or in danger unless they shoot at us or are aggressive at us." SOG creeped around the property and created an assessment of what they thought would end the stalemate. Dogs are wrestling. After waiting months for the report, it came back with zero recommendations. So all of the just like, how can we resolve this peacefully? You can't, is what they came up with. So yeah. Great work. So now all of the government agencies involved are collectively shitting their pants. They were convinced that Randy was crazed and would shoot on sight and that the property was booby-trapped. And unfortunately, negotiations were going nowhere. And so began Operation Northern Exposure. After an article was released on March 8th in the Spokesman Review written by Bill Moreland, the story blew up and reporters were flocking to the mountain. Geraldo Rivera even had a chopper there, which Randy flipped off. And
all right, go Randy.
On the news next day, which is a great way to not be on the news, is flipping off the cameras.
All right, I don't support pretty much anything Randy did, but flipping off Geraldo Rivera is pretty cool.
Yeah, they were listening to the radio the next day, and they were saying that the Weavers shot at them.
That tracks.
And then later, the pilots were like, "Well, maybe it's not true." It's like, Jesus Christ, guys, come on.
It's got to be on camera, right? It's got to be on camera, right? That's sort of the whole thing with having the news chopper.
Because I was running out of time, I'm not gonna go super into the whole surveillance aspect and like super deep into the woods or weeds about who said what to get what ball rolling. If you want all that information, it's in Jess Walter's book. The kind of most notable action for me was that the Weavers had discovered a hidden camera on the property and they had burned it. So they definitely, they knew they were being watched, but they had evidence that they were being watched. Aside from
the cops calling them paranoid is sort of bullshit. When, when you start finding cameras put on your property that you didn't put there, you have somewhat of a right to be at least a little paranoid.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Another thing I'd like to make note of before we wrap up this short episode, yay, is a conversation between two of the deputies that were involved in the ordeal that occurred the day before shit went down. One of the men, who is a medic, asked the other agent if they should have a medical helicopter on standby the next day in case something went wrong. The other agent assured him it would be fine. It, in fact, was not going to be fine.
That's so dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something too. This article that was released by Bill Moreland. Like, obviously, like the planning stages were already going into effect for the actual arrest attempt, the real breach of the property, not just the skulking around in the woods and putting up game cameras and stuff, but like actually trying to apprehend the Weavers. A lot of it, like the gas pedal was put down when this article came out, because the article was basically about like, it's not Sandpoint that they're at, but they're close by because they're in the Panhandle. It doesn't matter, whatever town in Idaho they were close to. It's like we have a fugitive in our own backyard was sort of like the title. It was broadly what the title was about, and it made the ATF and the FBI look really bad. Not as bad as the events would, but hindsight being what it is, at the moment they felt like it made them look really bad, because it looked like they weren't able to apprehend like one guy alone on a mountain, or not alone, but one guy on a mountain. And that definitely added to the environment of we need to rush through this, and was part of the reason a lot of the planning was like very slapdash. And
In his book, Sogg said they went with the cheapest and quickest method.
Yeah.
That was their...
Yeah, the cheapest and quickest method was their response to being made to look incompetent by a news article. Personally, I'd much rather be made to look incompetent by a news article than my own shitty actions. But any whoozleby.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in fact not fine.
It's not going to be fine, y'all, in part 3. So, for those unfamiliar with the following events, this is where all of the content warnings from part 1 come into play. Again, not a happy story. So, it was about 10:30 a.m. on Friday, August 21st, 1992, when the family dog, Stryker, began to bark excitedly. Sam and Kevin followed the dog while Randy walked down an old logging road, parallel to their direction. Randy reached the intersection where the logging road met with another road, known as the Y, when an armed man in camo appeared in front of him and yelled, "Freeze, Randy!" Randy responded with, "Fuck you," and ran back towards home. While Randy was running from the Y to his home, he heard a gunshot and Stryker yelping, then 2 more shots, then silence. He yelled to the boys that Stryker had been shot and to go back into the house, then he heard more gunshots. Hoping to distract the agents, Randy fired a shot into the air with his double-barrel shotgun, which jammed, so then he used his 9mm pistol to shoot into the air 3 more times. He was still hearing shots, but heard Sam yell, "I'm coming, Dad," and so Randy headed to the cabin. While all this was going on, Sam and Kevin had stumbled across 3 federal agents, and the events from here vary depending on who's telling the story, but for now we're going to focus on Kevin's account of what happened. As the 2 boys were walking down a trail, Stryker rushed toward a man donned in camo and armed with a silenced submachine gun. Before Kevin could tell the man that Stryker was just playing, not attacking, Stryker ran around the man once and began racing uphill when the man shot the dog and ran into the bushes. A later autopsy would confirm that Stryker was shot in the rear, meaning he was not attacking the man when he was shot. Sam stopped in front of his now-dead dog and cried, "You shot my dog, you son of a bitch," and raised his gun toward the marshals and fired. Sam was then shot in the arm and yelled that he had been hit. Kevin fired at the marshals to protect Sam and was nearly shot in the process. Kevin headed for cover, smoke puffs and shell casings filling the air. He could also hear Randy calling for them. Kevin made his way back to Sam, who was laying face down in the road. Kevin turned him over and saw blood covering his chest. His eyes were rolled back into his head, and his lips were beginning to turn blue. He wasn't breathing and had no pulse. Kevin left him and headed to the cabin. It was later confirmed that Sam, a 14-year-old boy less than 5 feet tall, weighing less than 80 pounds, was shot in the back. I want to add a note here that it is in his statement to the FBI and under oath at Kevin's trial, Marshal Thomas Norris, who was on the 6-man team present on the property that day, testified that the first 3 shots at the Y sounded distinctly like a .223 caliber. Is that how you say that, right?
223.
223, okay. Rather than the boom of a 30-06?
30-06.
30, oh, I always thought it's 30-6.
No,
30
it's 30 caliber made in 1906. 30-06. Which
Okay.
I will say have 2 very distinctly different sounds,
Yeah.
having shot both extensively.
Yeah. So what this is saying essentially is that the marshals shot first.
Yes,
3
the
times.
marshals with their M16s, the 223, shot first before the Weavers with their 30-06 hunting rifles.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they had a BAR, but I don't think that ever came up.
I don't know what that is.
It's a Browning automatic rifle. It's an automatic rifle chambered in 30-06. It's like a very uncommon caliber to have anything other than a deer rifle in.
Where are we? After Randy was back at the cabin, Kevin showed up alone in tears. He told the family that Sam was dead and Randy broke down. Sara had her rifle on her and Randy took it, emptying the entire clip in the air. While Sara reloaded, Vicky ran inside to change from a skirt into jeans and boots. When she returned, she told the rest of the family that they needed to retrieve Sam, and so they did, not knowing that the agents who killed the boy were still there watching within the woods. Luckily, they were able to get Sam without incident and lay him in their guest shed. They rested the body on top of a bed, and in the same bed Vicky had birthed Elishaba on, then cleaned the blood from his body and wrapped him in a sheet. He had been shot in the back, and part of his elbow had been blown off. It was around this time that the family began hearing sirens. For a while, they camped outside with food, blankets, and ammunition, but after it began to rain, they moved inside the cabin. They tied up Sara's dog, Buddy, outside so he could alert them to any outside presence. Anytime Randy left the house that day, Sara was by his side, not wanting anything to happen to her father while he was alone. The house was quiet that evening, with little to no sleeping or eating. The family learned from listening to the radio that the narrative was that the Weavers had ambushed a couple of U.S. Marshals, and that was how Kevin learned that he had shot and killed Marshal William Deegan. There was no more communication or contact until the next evening. Before we continue, let's go over the Marshals' version of events that day. Marshals Cooper, Roderick, and Deegan, in the woods of the Weaver property, heard Stryker bark and catch on to their scent. They ran from the Weavers, believing to be in an ambush. Roderick told the men they needed to take the dog out, and Cooper said he would take care of the dog if it got too close. Cooper popped out into a trail, spotted Randy, and yelled, "Back off, U.S. Marshal," and Randy turned and ran. Cooper, Deegan, and Roderick were hiding in the woods when Kevin, Sam, and Stryker appeared. Deegan rose from behind a stump and allegedly flashed his ID and yelled, "Freeze, U.S. Marshal," and Kevin shot him in the chest. Cooper saw this and then fired at Kevin, who dropped to the ground. Cooper radioed to Roderick, but he was busy dealing with Stryker. The dog had run up to him, then turned and ran back to Sam as Roderick shot the dog in the back. Sam stumbled upon his dead dog, yelled at Roderick, and then fired at him, hitting him in the stomach. Shots flew from everywhere, and Roderick dove for cover. It was allegedly unclear to them if Sam had been shot. Shortly after this, Deegan died in Cooper's arms. At this time, the story was that the only casualty so far was that of Deegan, and that the men were pinned down on the mountain and under fire. Later, all the marshals' guns would be inspected to see how many rounds were fired. Roderick had fired once, Cooper fired 2 3-round bursts, and Deegan was missing 7 rounds, although Cooper claimed Deegan hadn't fired a single shot. Meanwhile, the narrative among the powers that be was that the property was booby-trapped and the whole family, including the children, were out for blood, and so the FBI changed the rules of engagement. The standard rules of engagement are as follows.
Agents are not to use deadly force against any person except as necessary in self-defense or in the defense of another when they have reason to believe they or another are in danger of death or grievous bodily harm. Whenever feasible, verbal warning should be given before deadly force is applied.
Guys, chill out. And here's what the rule was changed to for Operation Northern Exposure.
If any adult in the compound is observed with weapons after the surrender announcement is made, deadly force can and should be used to neutralize this individual. If any adult male is observed with a weapon prior to the announcement, deadly force can and should be employed if a shot can be taken without endangering the children. If compromised by any dog, the dog can be taken out. Any subjects other than Randy, Vicky, and Kevin presenting threat of death or grievous bodily harm, FBI rules of deadly force apply.
These rules of engagement were approved by Jean Glenn, one of my least favorite humans, and faxed along with the plan to the Deputy Assistant Director, who claims he only received the first page of the document and never saw the rules of engagement. On Saturday, August 22nd, the family solemnly completed their chores, darting from place to place to avoid being shot by snipers. Around 4:30 p.m., they heard their dogs barking outside, and Randy, Kevin, and Sara decided to investigate. Randy didn't see anyone, so he headed to the guest shed to check on Sam when he was shot in the back. Randy claims he whipped around to spit in the face of whoever shot him, but he turned and saw no one. Sara had rushed over to her father, who told her he had been shot. She yelled at him to get into the house and shoved him in that direction, while Vicky, with baby Alicia in her arms, stood on the porch to see what was going on. As Sara used her body to shield her father from the snipers, she thought to herself, "If you want to murder my dad, you're going to have to shoot another kid in the back first." As her family ran toward the cabin, Vicky then did something out of character, which was to curse, yelling, "You bastards." Randy and Sara got into the house while Vicky held the door open for them. As he's the one that saw it happen, I think it's most fitting to use Kevin's description of what happened next.
As I started through the door, I heard a loud boom. I was looking at Vicky, at her face. As I heard the shot, it was as if there was something moving under her skin, then her face was deformed, almost seemed to explode. Next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor. When I couldn't feel my left hand, I realized I'd been hit. Vicky convulsed several times and then was still.
Vicky had been shot in the head, her blood and pieces of skull showering the three girls. After the initial shock wore off, the Weavers quickly grabbed Alicia and placed her in Rachel's arms. The baby was unharmed, although blood and bits of bone littered her hair and body. Meanwhile, Rachel was sobbing, repeating, "I can't live without Mom." Vicky and Randy had been shot by a man named Lou Horiuchi, one of the FBI's best snipers, allegedly, using a .308 caliber sniper rifle with a weighted barrel and a 10-power scope. Later, Horiuchi would testify multiple times that the visibility that day was quote-unquote excellent. When Horiuchi had initially fired at Randy, he had missed at least one shot from just 200 yards away. Can you give us a visual of what 200 yards is for us?
Two football fields?
2 football fields? All right.
Yeah, it's 200-yard shot. Isn't an easy shot, but snipers are trained to be able to shoot a lot better than that.
The bullet that killed Vicky had traveled through her skull and into Kevin's arm, lodging itself near his heart. Sara cradled Kevin's head in her arms and tried to help him the best she could, but he told her he was dying. Meanwhile, Randy dragged Vicky into the kitchen and searched for a blanket to cover the body. After getting Kevin into a more comfortable position, Sara remembered that her father had been injured, so she had a look at his arm, but couldn't see where the bullet had come out. Randy put his jacket back on, then he and the girls sat down on the living room floor and, to quote Sara, waited to die. Here's a direct quote from Randy about the scene to give you a feel for the atmosphere that evening.
Later that night, the pain was so bad that Kevin asked me to kill him by shooting him in the head when he wasn't looking. I told him I couldn't do it. He would have to use his good arm and do it himself. My daughter started crying and pleading with Kevin, begging him not to do it. They said, "We've lost too many already."
Later into the night, they could hear people creeping around under the house. Randy yelled at them through the floor that they had murdered Vicky and Sam, and that he and Kevin were wounded, but got no response. Throughout the night, Alicia would wake up crying, calling out for her mother, but there was nothing they could do. Vicky was dead. On Sunday, the 23rd, a bullhorn rang out, telling the family to pick up a phone that they had set up 50 yards from the house. Inside the cabin, Sara and Randy were patching up Kevin, who had a wound almost 2.5 inches wide and raised about a 3/4 inch. In addition to the bullet hole, he also had broken ribs. They gave him cayenne pepper capsules to combat blood poisoning, used an entire bottle of peroxide on his wounds, and utilized golden deal to help with the infection. Sara spotted a clump of something stuck on Kevin's pant leg, only to discover it was a bloody clump of her mother's hair. She didn't mention it to anyone at the time. Kevin survived, constantly requesting water and cigarettes and going in and out of consciousness. Sara also patched up her father after they noticed an exit hole on the jacket he had been wearing, and sure enough, when he took his shirt off, there was an exit wound in his armpit. Sara said the stench of blood and raw flesh made her sick. All while this was going on, Rachel took care of baby Alicia, who thankfully slept a lot. Soon after the bullhorn started, an APC, armored personnel carrier, began driving around the property, destroying anything in its path. Randy worried that the tank would run over the shed holding Sam's body, but he later learned on a news report that agents had removed Sam's body, with some also reporting that it had been Kevin who had killed Sam. The family had another restless evening as agents turned floodlights onto the cabin throughout the night. The next morning, a man from the hostage rescue team named Fred Lansley went on to the bullhorn, ordering Randy to pick up the phone or to send Vicky or the girls out. He would repeat, "Mrs. Weaver, how's the baby, Mrs. Weaver? Is there anything we can do for the kids, Mrs. Weaver?" Remember, Vicky was lying dead on the kitchen floor after being shot in the head. Fred would also repeatedly refer to baby Elishaba as Elizabeth, which is great. That's a great way to negotiate with somebody, is to get the baby's name wrong.
And ask for a dead woman.
Yeah, that too. Dave and Jean, Sam's grandparents, heard about the boy's death via national news on the following Monday, the 24th, although they had arrived the day prior, where federal agents had the opportunity to tell the Jordansons of the news of Sam's death in person, face to face. That evening was just like the last, with floodlights blaring through the windows and the sounds of APCs prowling around the property. Tuesday the 25th was relatively uneventful, with the exception of a new man with a Spanish accent on the microphone, calling out again to Vicky and inviting the family to enjoy some pancakes. On the 26th, the family began writing a letter telling their side of the story in case they didn't survive. Fred was back on the bullhorn, alerting the family that a robot would be coming to their door with a phone attached to it. After a few unsuccessful pleas to get Randy to pick up the phone, Fred said the robot would soon be breaking a window and pushing the phone into the house, but after Randy yelled that he would shoot it through the door and to back off, they complied. The robot stayed untouched on the porch until days later, but Sara said every time she was in the kitchen, she could hear it humming. Because the family hadn't fired from their cabin, the property clearly wasn't booby-trapped, and the details of Deacon's shooting began to unravel, the rules of engagement were reversed. Next on the mic was a man named John. Randy told the man that the only person he would speak to was his sister Marnie. I don't know if it's spelled like Marnis.
Marnice?
Marnice.
Marnie? I think Marnie's
I think
right.
Marnie
I've
looks
heard
right.
that name before, at least.
Yeah. But the conversation was frustrating due to the fact that they were yelling at each other from far away, and it was likely difficult for the agents to hear what Randy was saying. Eventually they got the drift, but asked if Randy planned on killing himself or his kids after his story got out. Randy swore he wouldn't, and they promised to get Marnie there from Iowa. The following day, Thursday the 27th, the agent placed the loudspeaker under the cabin and played a message from the prominent radio host Paul Harvey, who pleaded with Randy to answer the phone, as well as a message from the kids' grandparents. At about noon, it was announced on the bullhorn that Marnie was on her way, but they wouldn't allow her to approach the cabin. So instead, she had to communicate via the bullhorn, but was unable to hear anything Randy was trying to tell her due to her hearing loss, so eventually they all gave up. Elsewhere, crowds of protesters had gathered at the police roadblock 2 miles from the property. The police had begun arresting protesters armed with guns in their vehicles on the 25th after multiple groups had tried to enter the property to help the Weavers either by negotiating or bringing more firearms. The crowd consisted of neighbors, Kevin's family, skinheads from Portland and Vegas, and a handful of veterans. One of the skinheads who was arrested pissed himself. Among the crowd was Colonel James Bo Greitz, a former Green Beret, and if you remember in part 1, Randy cited Greitz's book Called to Serve. On the 28th, Randy heard the news that Greitz was in town and yelled from the cabin that he would be willing to talk with a Green Beret. Greitz? No, I know.
No.
Greitz attempted a citizen's arrest on Jean Glenn, which I kind of love. Due to the pressure on Glenn, Greitz was allowed to approach the cabin and speak with Randy on Friday, August 28th. The first thing Randy told Greitz was that Vicky was dead and that he and Kevin were wounded. The two talked for a bit, then Greitz left and promised he'd be back the next day. Here's a clip of Glenn announcing Vicky's death.
The 3 children are in good health. Kevin is all right, but he did suffer a wound. Randy's in good health. Unfortunately, Vicky is dead.
God, that clip. Okay, so Walter's book paints Glenn as a sympathetic character, saying he was tearing up during that announcement and that Vicky's family appreciated him, but after watching the PBS documentary, I don't see it. Like, that's just his face. Like, he just has this kind of concerned look on his face. I don't think he's like... I think he's embarrassed. But anyways, this is my own personal shit. Greitz returned in the morning with a mutual friend of the Weavers, Jackie Brown. The two listened as the family read them their written account of what had happened, and Sara asked Jackie to tell her family and friends that they loved them. Eventually, Jackie came into the house and checked on the men's wounds. She was given a letter from the Jordansons and a copy of their story. On the paper, Sara had written Alicia's name in all caps. Because Jackie had been searched on her way into the cabin, Sara came up with the clever plan of hiding the papers in a maxi pad. Jackie placed the pad in her underwear and successfully passed the FBI's pat-down. On his way out, Greitz examined the robot still hanging out on the porch and discovered in addition to the attached phone, it also had a camera and a sawed-off shotgun attached to it, which is like a terrible irony. Just like he, is charged with like the sawing off of shotguns and he hates,
Yeah.
It's something else. The next morning on the 30th, Greitz returned once again with former Phoenix police officer Jack McLam and mediated a negotiation between Kevin and the agents. They came to an agreement that Kevin would surrender if the troops surrounding the property would withdraw. Greitz convinced Randy to let Kevin go by telling him that if Kevin died in that cabin, Greitz would hold Randy personally responsible and testify against Randy in court. Greitz and McLam helped Kevin off the property, and he was taken to a hospital where he stayed for about 2.5 weeks. Once Kevin was released from the hospital, he was taken into custody and was charged in federal district court with the following, and prosecutors were going for the death penalty.
The first-degree murder of Agent William Deegan, conspiring with the Weaver family to cause an armed confrontation with the government, assault with a deadly weapon on Roderick Cooper and Deegan, assault with a deadly weapon on a helicopter, harboring a fugitive, i.e. Randy, aiding and abetting the possession of firearms by Randy, and using a firearm to commit said crimes.
He never shot at a helicopter. That was Randy that shot at a helicopter.
Oh, yeah.
Kevin's trial lasted about 2 months and involved 56 witnesses from the prosecution and none from the defense. On July 8, 1993, the jury found Kevin not guilty on all counts. Back to the 30th of August, 1992. Later in the day, after escorting Kevin off the property, Greitz returned with Jackie Brown and a body bag for Vicky. Bo carried Vicky from the kitchen, vowing that her body would not touch the ground, while Jackie stayed behind to clean up the blood. Bo returned one last time that day to talk with Randy, then he and Jackie left. Later, Randy removed Vicky's rings from his pockets and gave them to Rachel and Sara. At this point, the hostage rescue team was done negotiating and were planning a raid the next day, but overnight Glenn had decided to give it one more shot. Fred, Lansley, and Greitz came up with Operation Alaska, a contingency plan in case the negotiations fell through. Greitz and McLam would wait for Alicia to fall asleep, then McLam would grab Sara and Rachel and bring them to the floor, while Greitz would jump on Randy. After using the code word Alaska on his radio, agents would come in and hopefully make the arrests without incident. On the morning of August 30th, Greitz and McLam were back with a letter from family and friends and were demanding that Randy surrender. Sara didn't trust the men, and that only raised tensions. Greitz ultimately convinced Randy to surrender, and Randy was able to convince his daughter that surrender was the best option. Sara and her sisters changed and packed up some of their things, laying down their weapons for the first time in almost 2 weeks. Then, hand in hand, Randy, Sara, Rachel, and Alicia stepped out of the cabin. Randy was immediately strapped to a stretcher and taken into custody. The girls were put into a car and taken to a neighbor's house, which was being used as a sort of base. All around them were hundreds of camouflaged men, helicopters, emergency vehicles, and tents. At the neighbor's home, the girls were offered juice and cookies, and Sara was questioned about whether there were landmines on the property. Again, there were not. The girls were allowed to say a final goodbye to their father before he was loaded into a helicopter. From there, they were taken by their grandparents to a hotel where they watched their father being transported on the news. Sara desperately wanted to stay in Idaho to be close to her father, but her family convinced her that going to Iowa was the only way they could stay together. And so Sara, Rachel, and Alicia moved to Iowa to be with their family. Sam and Vicky's bodies were cremated shortly after the siege ended, but Randy noted in his book that prior to the cremation, the FBI had cut off Vicky's fingers and sent them to a facility in Quantico, and were never returned for cremation, nor was any reason for this ever given. I tried to look that up. I couldn't find anything. If anybody knows, you can now email me at kelizabeth.pod@gmail.com. I remembered to set up a email, like I said I was going to do months ago. I remembered it today, like an hour ago. So, yay. But essentially, all that shit that we talked about in part 1 with like Armageddon and, the federal government's overreach, all of that, it happened to them. Like, their story became true.
Yeah, with, in the history of these raids, which this is, of course, not the only one that exists, but there's sort of a weird trend in the feds, whether it's the Marshals or the FBI or the DEA or the ATF or all of those, whatever the alphabet soup gang it is, kind of making these prophecies come true. And admittedly, these prophecies are very easy to attach to anything that goes wrong, so it's not like they were right. But I mean, we saw it with Waco, we saw it with the Move bombing being an interesting thing too, and directly opposite of this in a lot of ways, most ways. But anyway, yeah, it's just a funny trend in these kinds of incidents.
Marty. I was about to make a comment that, now they've calmed down as we're wrapping up, but then she starts talking again. Yeah. That's what you get if you get a husky or a husky mix, just so y'all know.
They make a lot of sounds.
Yes, they're very talkative. For the upcoming trial, Kevin Harris was represented by Dave Nevin and Ellison Matthews, and Randy Weaver by Jerry Spence and Jerry's son Kent, as well as Jerry's assistant and right-hand gal, Jean Bontadelli. Spence paid a visit to Randy during his first night in jail. The first thing he said to Weaver was this.
My name is Jerry Spence. I'm the lawyer you've been told about. Before we begin to talk, I want you to understand that I do not share any of your political or religious beliefs. Many of my dearest friends are Jews. My daughter is married to a Jew. My sister is married to a black man. She has adopted a black child. I deplore what the Nazis stand for. If I defend you, I will not defend your political beliefs or your religious beliefs, but your right as an American citizen to a fair trial.
To which Randy replied, that is all I ask. The men shook hands, talked, and Spence agreed to look into his case. After agreeing to represent Randy, Spence got a lot of backlash. I think this letter he wrote in response to Alan Hirschfield, former chairman of Chief Executive Officer of Columbia Pictures and 20th Century Fox, who had asked Spence to withdraw, really encapsulates the whole reason I wanted to cover this episode. Here's what Spence wrote to Hirschfield. Sorry, but it's a long quote. Are you ready for this? Do you want me to read that? It's pretty long. Okay.
Randy Weaver's principal crime against the government had been his failure to appear in court on a charge of possessing illegal firearms. The first crime was not his. He had been entrapped, intentionally, systematically, patiently, purposefully entrapped, by a federal agent who solicited him to cut off, contrary to federal law, the barrels of a couple of shotguns. Randy Weaver never owned an illegal weapon in his life. He was not engaged in the manufacture of illegal weapons. The idea of selling an illegal firearm had never entered his mind until a government agent suggested it and encouraged him to act illegally. The government knew he needed the money. He is as poor as an empty cupboard. He had 3 daughters, a son, and a wife to support. He lived in a small house in the woods without electricity or running water. Although he is a small, frail man with tiny, delicate hands, who probably weighs no more than 120 pounds, he made an honest living by chopping firewood and by seasonal work as a logger. This man is wrong, his beliefs are wrong, his relationship to mankind is wrong. He was perhaps legally wrong when he failed to appear and defend himself in court, but the first wrong was not his, nor was the first wrong the government's. The first wrong was ours. In this country, we embrace the myth that we are still a democracy when we know that we are not a democracy, that we are not free, that the government does not serve us but subjugates us. Although we give lip service to the notion of freedom, we know the government is no longer the servant of the people, but at last has become the people's master. We have stood by like timid sheep while the wolf killed, first the weak, then the strays, then those on the outer edges of the flock, until at last the entire flock belonged to the wolf. We did not care about the weak or about the strays. They were not a part of the flock. We did not care about those on the outer edges. They had chosen to be there. But as the wolf worked its way towards the center of the flock, we discovered that we were now on the outer edges. Now we must look at the wolf squarely in the eye. That we did not do so when the first of us was ripped up and torn and eaten was the first wrong. It was our wrong. That none of us felt responsible for having lost our freedom has been a part of an insidious progression. In the beginning, the attention of the flock was directed not to the marauding wolf, but to our own deviant members within the flock. We rejoiced as the wolf destroyed them, for they were our enemies. We were told that the weak lay under the rocks while we faced the blizzards to rustle our food, and we did not care when the wolf took them. We argued that they deserved it. When one of our flock faced the wolf alone, it was always eaten. Each of us was afraid of the wolf, but as a flock we were not afraid. Indeed, the wolf cleansed the herd by destroying the weak and dismembering the aberrant element within. As time went by, strangely, the herd felt more secure under the rule of the wolf. It believed that by belonging to the...
This wolf over here.
Yeah, Marty, I know we're talking about wolves, but you mind? It believed that by belonging to this wolf, it would remain safe from all other wolves, but we were eaten just the same. When Randy Weaver failed to appear in court because he had lost his trust in the government, we witnessed the fruit of our crime. The government indeed had no intent to protect his rights. The government had but one purpose, as it remains today, the disengagement of this citizen from society. Alan, I agree with your arguments. They are proper and they are true. I agree that my defense of Randy Weaver may attach a legitimacy and dignity to his politics and religion. But it may as well stand for the proposition that there are those who don't condone this kind of criminal action by our government. I view the defense of Randy Weaver's case as an opportunity to address a more vital issue, one that transcends a white separatist movement or notions of the supremacy of one race over another. For the ultimate enemy of any people is not the angry hate groups that fester within, but a government itself that has lost its respect for the individual. The ultimate enemy of democracy is not the drug dealer or the crooked politician or the crazed skinhead. The ultimate enemy is the new king that has become so powerful it can murder its own citizens with impunity. To the same extent that Randy Weaver cannot find justice in this country, we will be deprived of justice. At last, my defense of Randy Weaver is a defense of every Jew and every Gentile, for every black and every gay who loves freedom and deplores tyranny.
Great work. Randy and Kevin would be tried together in the spring of 1993, and for the next 7 months, the men were held at Ada County Jail in Boise. They were frequently moved to different cells, sometimes multiple times a day. It could be a security measure, but Randy believed it was a harassment tactic. Kevin and Randy were in jail for 7 months leading up to their court date and weren't allowed to speak to each other throughout that time. The prosecuting attorneys were Kim Lindquist and Ron Howen, who had battled with the Aryan nations before. Howen wrote up a 16-page indictment which included 10 separate charges. I thought you were going to sneeze. 1. Conspiracy to provoke a confrontation, sawing off a shotgun, failing to appear for court, assaulting and impeding deputy marshals, killing William Deegan, intimidating or impeding an FBI helicopter, harboring a fugitive, Randy Weaver, possessing guns and ammunition as a fugitive, violating terms of release, and carrying a firearm in commission of a crime. In November of 1992, Maurice Ellsworth, the U.S. Attorney for Idaho, requested permission from the Justice Department to seek the death penalty, but the judge in the case ruled in February 1993 that the death penalty didn't apply. Prosecutors requested documents from the FBI, but they failed to release many of them, and it was determined that some of the reports had been shredded to conceal evidence. Some of the missing documents include the incident report about Horiuchi's shots, that's who shot Vicky and Kevin and Randy. I guess she shot everybody.
Except for Sam.
The review of the shooting incident report, the operations plan, and the FBI's critique of the U.S. Marshal Service. In addition, the FBI laboratory stalled and deflected prosecutors, even allowing some blood samples to spoil. Prosecutors weren't the only ones butting heads with the FBI. The Marshal Service was going back and forth with the agency, shifting blame about the case. Leading up to the trial, Gene Glenn's assistant, Dave Tubbs, was refuting Spence's press releases in regard to the government killing Vicky, saying, quote,
I can tell you we don't shoot mothers with babies in their arms. So, obviously, if a shooting occurred that resulted in the death of Vicky Weaver, something happened to precipitate that shooting. We don't go around killing people unless there's good reason.
Mm-hmm. The Weaver-Harris trial began on Wednesday, April 14th, 1993, at the federal courtroom of U.S. District Judge Edward J. Lodge in Boise, Idaho. Each day of the trial, a large convoy, complete with SWAT teams, would escort the men to court. The first witness to the prosecution was U.S. Marshal Larry Cooper, who gave conflicting testimony. He testified that Kevin shot first and that he never shot at Sam. Ballistic experts said that it was Cooper's bullet that killed Sam. It was also clear from Cooper's testimony that they had planned to shoot Stryker all along. Next on the stand was informant Kenneth Fadley, a.k.a. Gus. The jurors listened to his recorded conversations with Randy, proving Randy's racist beliefs to the jury and his involvement with legal firearms. In a win for the defense team, however, it was revealed that Fadley would receive payment for a conviction, meaning he had every reason to lie on the stand.
Woof.
On the fifth day of the trial, April 19th, 1992, jurors were instructed to ignore the siege playing out in Waco, Texas, where a Branch Davidian quote-unquote compound was being burnt to the ground. In fact, many of the key players in the Ruby Ridge incident were involved in the events at Mount Carmel, including Richard Dick Rogers, the man in charge of the hostage rescue team, and one of the two men who rewrote the rules of engagement. And I think Horiuchi was as well.
I think you're right on that.
I feel like there's enough stuff about Waco out there that we don't really need to get into it.
No, it's just the feds taking L's just left and right in the early 90s.
Yeah, but so many parallels between the two.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's...
I think we talked about it in the first episode, too.
Oh, yeah. God, I should have listened to those before I did this. Hindsight 2020. ATF agent Herb Byerly was next on deck, where he denied Fadley's financial incentive for the conviction and testified to Randy's violation of the law. Byerly was followed by two more ATF agents, as well as those involved with his failed court appearance, who collectively admitted that they fucked up. Like, everyone's like, oh, yeah, I sent him the wrong date, my bad. And this person's like, oh, yeah, I sent him the wrong date, my bad. And it's just like, yep, we knew this. U.S. Attorney Maurice Ellsworth testified about Vicky's Queen of Babylon letters, going back and forth with Spence on whether or not it's a First Amendment issue or a viable threat. By May, the judge ruled that so far he saw no conspiracy by anyone. I'm not going to go over every witness and their testimonies against the Weavers, because the prosecution had 54 witnesses. If you want to know more, go read Jess Walter's book. Spence complained to the judge that the jury was being spoiled by repetitive testimony, but on May 18th, Judge Lodge told Spence,
to date, about 75% of the witnesses called by the government have been favorable to the defense.
Yep. Next, the prosecution attempted to pull a stunt by laying out all of the Weavers' firearms. 6 pistols, 6 rifles, 2 shotguns, and 4,500 rounds of ammunition. They also played... You're chuckling. They also played surveillance footage of the Weavers walking around armed on their property. The thing about Idahoans, though, is that they love their guns. When asked if they owned firearms, nearly every hand in the jury went up. That being said, some jurors were bothered to see Sara and Sam armed. Just before Memorial Day weekend, it was revealed that the prosecution had withheld a critical interview Howen had with David Neal, a member of the Idaho State Police Critical Response Team, one of the men who had brought the deputy marshals and Deegan's body down from the mountain. In the interview, Neal stated that Roderick claimed to have shot the dog, thereby proving the series of events at the Y as told by the Weavers. It was debated whether or not to put Sara on the stand, but after listening to some of her beliefs on race, definitely handed down from her parents, the defense decided she was too damn honest for the stand. And that being said, later on and afterwards, she would go on to, like, mingle with other kids. Like, it's so, like, back and forth, and it's, like, so complicated. And she's, like, tried to... I'm going off on a tangent now, but she's, like, tries to, like, distance herself from, like, all of that as she, like, gets older. But... anyways, that's something else for later. Speaking of honesty on the stand, though, U.S. Marshal Art Roderick was up next. Roderick repeatedly claimed to have heard a shot before he shot Stryker, who, again, was running away from the marshals. He also denied telling David Neal that he shot first. Deputy Marshal Frank Norris, who I mentioned in the last episode, was next to testify, essentially saying he heard the sound of an agent's .223 go off first. It was revealed with more witness testimony and evidence had been hidden or misplaced, including a bullet that had most definitely been planted by the FBI to place Sara at the events of the Y with her .223. If you want more information on that, you can go look in the book. But yeah, it's fact. Associate Director for Operations of the U.S. Marshals Service, Duke Smith, also testified. Smith had been with Richard Rogers when the rules of engagement were revised, and it was also in the helicopter that Lon Horiuchi said he was protecting when he began shooting the Weavers. In his testimony, Smith admitted that the rules of engagement were written before talking to any of the men present on the mountain, and that his helicopter had never really been in danger. Oh, and when I was going back and saying that, like, reading Randy's book first, I've been calling Lon Horiuchi Lou Horiuchi, but it's not, it's Lon. So embarrassing. But Lon Horiuchi was up next. And when he came in, they also brought in the cabin door with its curtains and all into the courtroom. And we have a picture of it in front of us right now. And you can see the glass and the bullet holes. Yeah, and this kind of iconic picture, Randy standing next to it. On the stand, Horiuchi told the courtroom that he had shot Randy but was trying to kill Kevin, and that when he killed Vicky, he was again aiming for Kevin. And perhaps more importantly, he claimed he couldn't see who he was shooting through the window of the door, which contradicted his other claim that he saw Kevin flinch through the window. Because as you'll see on the cabin door, there's curtains. They're covering the window.
And they are not see-through. Go look up that picture if you haven't seen it before. Once again, Prosecutor Howen would be dealing with the FBI's bullshit. After the final day of Horiuchi's testimony, Howen received a package from the FBI, postmarked May 21st, sent 2 weeks prior, 4th class. The package included interviews with FBI agents and a crude drawing by Horiuchi on a hotel notepad of just before taking the shot that killed Vicky. If you haven't seen it, again, go Google it. The drawing shows 2 heads visible through the window, despite Horiuchi's testimony saying he saw no one through the window. Judge Lodge was pissed when he found out and fined the government one day for the defense team's costs, even though they were working for free. Horiuchi was put back on the stand, and he told the court he only drew the 2 heads in the window after an FBI agent asked him to draw where he thought Randy and Sara were. At one point, Kent Spence discovered a previously unaccounted for bullet hole in Deacon's backpack, which showed that he had been shot at least once from behind. While it wasn't proof that Deacon was shot by another marshal, it did cast reasonable doubt. After 36 days of testimony, the prosecution rested its case. By the end of it, the case had taken its toll on Howen, both mentally and physically. During his closing argument, his hands shook, and he stopped mid-sentence, apologized to the judge, and said he couldn't continue, and sat down with his hands between his legs. Then Judge Lodge called a recess. Lodge then dismissed 2 of the charges, being a felon in possession of a firearm and threatening to shoot at a helicopter. I think that's a basic timeline thing, because if you haven't done your day in court, you aren't technically a felon.
Yeah.
That's pretty simple, actually.
If you want insight into the jury's deliberation, again, go read Jess Walter's book. But what I will tell you is that after 2 weeks, they had to start all over after one juror had a mental breakdown and bounced. He's like, I'm going to go get some help, and then he just, never came back. On July 8th, 1993, the jury announced their verdict. They had deliberated for 20 days, the longest in Idaho history. Kevin was found not guilty and was immediately released. Randy was also acquitted of all charges except the failure to appear in court. Randy received 18 months in jail, a $10,000 fine, and 3 years supervised probation, though he had served 14 months already and got 50 days off for good behavior, so he was released December 17th, 1993. All of Randy's fines were paid off by donations from a Florida man.
Florida man!
Thanks, Florida man! While their father stood trial and served his time, Weaver's remaining children moved to Johnston, Iowa, to live with their Aunt Julie, Vicky's sister, and Julie's husband, Keith, as well as their 2 daughters, Emily and Kelsey. There, Sara and Rachel attended public school for the first time and were looked down upon not only for their financial status. Sara described her fellow students as rich and snobby, but also for being related to Randy Weaver, whose trial dominated the news. Despite the social tension, Sara did well in school and bonded with one of her art teachers. After Randy was released in December of 1993, Rachel and Elishaba went with him to Grand Junction, Iowa, where Sara stayed with Keith and Julie to finish out her senior year, but moved to be with her father and her sisters after graduating. Following the trial, the Department of Justice formed the Ruby Ridge Task Force to address allegations of cover-ups and released a 542-page report from the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility on June 10, 1994, but it was not made public, though it was eventually leaked to the press. In the fall of 1994, Randy and Kevin filed civil suits against the government, charging them with the wrongful deaths of Sam and Vicky Weaver and for violating their rights and property. Their claim totaled over $300 million. On January 6, 1995, FBI Director Louis J. Free announced 12 FBI employees involved were disciplined or recommended for discipline, but they were all just slaps on the wrist. Glenn got the worst of it, being censured, suspended for 15 days, and reassigned, and Horiyuchi got pretty much off scot-free. Later in the same year, the Senate Judiciary Committee would hold hearings on the incidents at Ruby Ridge and Waco, Texas, involving allegations that multiple branches of the Departments of Justice and the Treasury engaged in serious criminal and professional misconduct. There were 14 days of hearings between September 6th and October 19th, 1995, which included 62 witnesses, interviews, documents, inquiries to Attorney General, Secretary of the Treasury, Director of the ATF, Director of the U.S. Marshal Service, Director of the FBI, Director of the U.S. Attorney General for Idaho, and more. The committee had two goals. 1, sift through information to reach conclusions on the events, and 2, determine policy changes or reforms. I took the liberty of reading through the findings, so you'll be able to get some direct quotes from that. Randy spoke at the hearings, demanding justice for his family.
I am here today to do all in my power to see that all citizens, including law enforcement officers, obey the law. I am here today because there must be accountability for the killings of my wife and son. When high-ranking FBI officials issue death warrants and cover up their involvement, the message they send to police officers all over the country is, it is okay if you can get away with it. Citizens who cannot trust their government band together in fear. If people in positions of power commit unlawful acts and are not held accountable, then citizens fear the government is justified.
Lon Horiyuchi was called to testify at the hearings, but invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. In regard to Horiyuchi shooting Vicky, the subcommittee concluded that
the second shot was inconsistent with the FBI's standard deadly force policy and was unconstitutional. Moreover, the subcommittee questions whether the second shot was justifiable even under the operative rules of engagement, which permitted deadly force, only if the shot can be taken without endangering any children. Horiyuchi's second shot, which went through the cabin door and killed Vicky Weaver, missed the 10-month-old baby in her arms, Elishaba, by less than 2 feet. We fail to see any reasonable basis for a judgment that high-powered rifles shot through an opaque door into an area that could hold a mother and several children, including an infant, could have been undertaken without endangering the children. In addition, he should have realized that Sara had just run into the house and that there was a possible bottleneck at the doorway. The subcommittee, however, does not believe that Horiyuchi saw Vicky Weaver or her baby behind the door, or that he knew that they were there. On the basis of his trial testimony and the physical evidence, we do not believe that Horiyuchi intentionally killed Vicky Weaver. The subcommittee concludes without reservation that the second shot should not have been taken. Horiyuchi basically failed one of the first rules of gun safety, which is be sure of your shot and beyond it, which is really frustrating. One of many frustrating things in this, but that's just 101 shooting safety.
the FBI's shooting incident review team's review is a hot mess, including occasionally referring to Vicky as Vicky Harris instead of Vicky Weaver. The team argued that when Vicky held the door open for Kevin Harris, she was, quote, attempting to assist Kevin Harris in a hostile action. The findings also go on to say,
and even more troubling is the team's conclusion that an innocent party who places herself in harm's way can be the subject of deadly force. That conclusion is frighteningly wrong.
On Thursday, May 14th, 1998, Lon Horiyuchi's manslaughter charge on the murder of Vicky Weaver was dismissed on the supremacy clause. Here are some more highlights from the findings. You ready for some reading? Do you want me to do that, or you got it?
Can we do the more zoomy zooms?
Yeah, we'll zoom in here a little bit. How's that?
That's good. The ultimate responsibility for what transpired at Ruby Ridge must be shared by many people. Weaver recognizes his mistake, and in fact candidly acknowledged it to us and to the American people on the first day of our hearings. But while Randy Weaver made mistakes, so did every federal law enforcement agency involved in the Ruby Ridge incident. This country can tolerate mistakes made by people like Randy Weaver, but we cannot accept serious errors made by federal law enforcement agencies that needlessly result in human tragedy. Randy Weaver and others have raised the issue of whether he was targeted for prosecution by ATF, not because of any criminal conduct, but because of his religious and political beliefs, specifically his affiliation with members of the Aryan nations. It is inappropriate for law enforcement agents to identify subjects for investigation or potential prosecution based on religious or political beliefs or affiliations, no matter how odious those beliefs may be. We believe that Weaver was targeted not so much for his beliefs, but for his association with violent people. Every agency involved with the Weaver case was careless at some level in the way that it handled information. As we have learned from what occurred at Ruby Ridge, the results of law enforcement reliance on inaccurate information can be devastating. In addition, the marshals came to accept a portrait of Randy Weaver and his family composed variously of fact, falsehood, misinterpretation, and exaggeration. Law enforcement cannot be strong when the public loses confidence in its integrity, its judgment, and its ability to act fairly, independently, and responsibly. The public lost some of that confidence as a result of the events at Ruby Ridge. By demanding public accountability for the mistakes that were made there and informing the American public of policy changes and other reforms that have been instituted, we hope to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The FBI now only acted precipitously. It also stressed a tactical rather than a negotiated response to the problem. This is reflected in the operations plan that was faxed to FBI headquarters on the afternoon of August 22, 1992. The operations plan contained no negotiation option, and it contained shoot-on-sight rules of engagement. The use of an HRT, hostage response team, robot with a shotgun further demonstrates how deeply flawed the HRT operation was. It should have come as no surprise to anyone that rather than aiding the negotiation process, this equipment frightened the Weavers and slowed the negotiation process. The subcommittee agrees with Director Free that the use of the robot with a shotgun was the stupidest thing I ever heard of. The subcommittee notes that no one has ever taken responsibility for this. According to the committee, the operations plan contained unconstitutional rules of engagement. Those rules provided, if any adult male in the compound is observed with a weapon prior to the surrender announcement, deadly force can and should be employed if the shot can be taken without endangering any children. They fucked that one up. If any adult in the compound is observed with a weapon after the surrender announcement is made and is not attempting to surrender, deadly force can and should be employed to neutralize the individual. They killed an unarmed person. If compromised by any animal or dog, that animal should be eliminated. I guess they followed that one, but that's a pretty fucked up one. Any subjects other than Randall Weaver, Vicky Weaver, Kevin Harris presenting threats of death or grievous bodily harm, the FBI rules of deadly force are in effect. Deadly force can be utilized to prevent the death or grievous bodily injury to oneself or that of another. These rules were inconsistent with the FBI standard deadly force policy, as that policy was in effect in August 1992. It provided agents are not to utilize deadly force against any person except as necessary in self-defense or for the defense of another when they have reason to believe that they or another are in serious danger of death and grievous bodily harm. Rules of engagement cannot eliminate constitutional rights with regard to certain suspects, even if they are particularly dangerous. The rules of engagement were in effect from the 22nd of August until the 26th of August, and yet, inexplicably, no one at headquarters admits to having been aware of what the rules were or having read them.
The FBI did an absolutely terrible job at handling the aftermath. There were allegations and evidence of cover-ups, and they failed to provide documents in a timely manner, or in some cases, never submitted the documents at all, as well as friends reviewing friends within internal investigations.
The subcommittee was also disappointed in the unwillingness of some high-ranking people in every agency to accept responsibility, to hold themselves accountable for their actions and those of their subordinates. In addition, the subcommittee questioned whether any of the agencies can fairly and objectively investigate and criticize itself in a case of this kind.
All right, we're almost done. Here's just this final little tidbit that it's terrible and then I want to throw in.
All right, well, at trial, the Weaver-Harris lawyers emphasized the fact that the Y area was not secured after the shooting incident and that many vehicles were permitted to drive through it before any search was conducted. Special Agent Mark Thundercloud commented that the dog striker who had been killed during the firefight had been run over by a government vehicle. Give them all the wall. What's the... Satire.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was satire.
It's like a modest proposal. You know, it's...
Satire.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in essence, it was agreed that everybody fucked up, but there would really be no true justice for those responsible. The civil suit that the Weavers had filed against the government was settled in August of 1995, awarding the girls with $1 million each and $100,000 going to Randy. Unfortunately, a term of the settlement meant that the government could refuse to acknowledge any wrongdoing on their part. In the spring of that same year, the Weavers sold their property to a friend of Kevin's. Eventually, Sara moved to western Montana with her fiancé, Dave Cooper. Kevin got married, has some kids, and in December of 2000, he accepted a settlement of $3,800,000 from the government.
$380,000.
Yep, 380,000. I have no idea what I said. From the government. Randy eventually followed suit to Montana, where he lived out the rest of his life. Randy passed away on May 11th, 2022, at the age of 74. The same year the Weavers had sold their cabin, a federal building was blown up in Oklahoma City by Timothy McVeigh, killing 168 people, including 19 children. His actions were in retaliation for what had transpired at Ruby Ridge and Waco. The sieges may have ended, but the radicalization of young white men to the far right had only just begun.
Yeah, fun fact about Timothy McVeigh and Ruby Ridge and Waco. Both the viewing parking lot protest areas, he was president at both of those at some point or another.
I know.
Yeah, it's like magnets for those folks. Especially pre-internet, you had to go get in the shit. Yeah. Just a weird thing. He was president at both. And we could get into into Oklahoma City and Elohim City and all the shit like that. In the aftermath of this and Waco, Timothy McVeigh was able to do what he did largely because the FBI was terrified of having another fuck up in Elohim City, and decided inaction was better than another fuck up, and Oklahoma City happened because of that. They fucked up both ways. They just don't do things right. Seems like they shouldn't exist.
There are only 2 FBI agents that I trust, and their names are Mulder and Scully.
And they're fictional TV characters.
Yeah, and they're not real, which is too bad. But aliens are real.
I want to believe.
But we want to believe that they're real.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they made this show, is to make you believe that they're not real. They're like, oh, look at this fictional show. They're getting ahead of the game. So that way, when you see aliens, you're like, oh, nice costume. Like, oh, nice prop.
Someone call Mulder and Scully in here. All right. Is that the end of it?
Yeah, that's the end.
Oh,
you have any final thoughts?
No, I think I got to it, but
yeah, I think
the
we did
FBI's
it.
continued fuck ups also caused Oklahoma City.
You heard it here, folks.
It's the FBI's fault. I mean, obviously McVeigh did it, but he didn't do it alone, and the feds let it happen.
And we should probably end it there. I'm not going to make this any longer than it needs to be. You've stuck it out for about 2 hours now. Congratulations. If you're like me, you love binging content, so I hope you enjoyed. And with that, we will see you next month.